Welcome to another episode of Splitting Smart, where Heather and I have candid and informative discussions with divorce and well-being professionals. I am Lila Aiken Ali, a divorcee, a divorce coach, and the founder of Split FYI.
And I'm Heather Steer, a divorcee, a CDFA divorce coach and co-founder of Split FYI. And today we are welcoming Kimberly Sandstrom she's a couples and divorce therapist. And when couples' harmful patterns lead to separation or divorce, Kimberly helps empower individuals as well as divorcing couples navigate the emotional detach during divorce and all that is involved in that process. Kimberly is also the creator of Classy Girl's Guide to Divorce and has a heart to help clients rebuild their lives with compassion and understanding.
Kimberly is a divorcee herself and has raised 3 daughters who are now successful adults, and is familiar with the understandings and the challenges of divorcing couples that they face while they're navigating their daily life. In today's chat, we will unpack and learn what it means to have an identity shift. I'm very excited about this, and how to take the high road, dealing with co-parenting issues, healing, and recreating a life after something as traumatic as divorce can be. Kimberly, it's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Layla and Heather. It's so fun to be here. I love what you both are doing and the trajectory of Split FYI and where you're going. So I'm just thrilled to be here, and thank you for including me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And whoops. And let's turn off all our sounds right here.
We're talking about the notifications everywhere. I mean, we've got
Absolutely.
Yeah, between dogs and technology is all our notification.
Absolutely.
All of us.
Can I share something right off the bat?
Sure.
You know, when you both introduced yourself and you said, I'm a divorcee, I have to tell you, we're talking about identity. I don't think I've ever said that word about myself.
Oh, you haven't?
I've been divorced for 6 years. I think it's like right then and there, it was a moment of, I'm a divorcee. Never ever thought. It just never occurred to me, and never used the term for myself. Interesting.
I know, and then we used it for you. Sorry.
Yeah.
You did. Well, that's what I am. I'm a divorcee.
The way that I look at it is that it's
a new part of my identity.
Right, but it's not a title. It's just something that we know we've gone through. And hey, listen, going through one, we earned our stripes. I mean, that was never an easy road, right? And it's kind of like, yeah, okay, we did it. We survived. And so...
Yeah, don't wish that title on anyone, but for some people, it is, a path forward into a shift in their world, and it's trying to figure out the silver linings and the making lemonade out of lemons and shifting your reality and what it is that you're gonna take forward in life. So,
absolutely,
I think that's a great segue into the whole, the identity shift, because I know that. Obviously, you've had personal experience with divorce through your own and maybe family and friends, but with your clients and what you do, can you explain a little bit more about that? Because there's so much,
Sure.
I mean, people understand what that means, an identity shift, but really let's dive a little bit more into that.
Sure, absolutely, Layla. So for me, I'll be honest, my heart for couples, because I'm mainly a couples therapist, helping couples reconnect and redo their relationship. And my heart is for them to heal and to be together and stay connected. However, divorce is a reality. And, like you said, family and friends, I come from a divorced family. I'm divorced myself, never thought in a million years after 27 years of marriage that that's what it would end up. And here I am. It's a whole new world out there. So I think for me, I took my experience and thought there's got to be a better way of doing this, or a different way, or a more healing way. And of course, I use my experience to help clients. It's not just my experience. I've done a lot of research because I only have my experience with divorce.
Right.
But I know everybody else is varied. And so, that's kind of how I got into it. As it was evolving for myself, I started journaling and started writing and thought, I need to write a small guide on this, like the Classy Girl's Guide to Divorce. That sounds really great. And off we went. And the book's not done, but the social media is all over the place. So,
yes.
And here I am.
And that's such a great title too, because it is about keeping it classy. I mean,
keeping it classy. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and staying true to yourself as well. So,
and discovering who you are without these, you know, we're talking about identity shifts today. You know, we start off as a son or a daughter. We, you know, that's our identity way back in childhood.
Mhm.
We then move to possibly boyfriend, girlfriend. We're a student. We're you know, a niece. We're a grandchild. And through life, we kind of take on all of these different identities. Then some of us get married, and that becomes part of our identity. Some of us become parents. That becomes part of our identity. I think 2 out of 3 of us are animal owners. That's part of our identity as well.
3 of us. Yep.
3 of us. Okay. I wasn't sure, Layla. And so you know, our identity is constantly morphing and changing. And then divorce happens.
Mm.
And these are the things that the identity shift is something that we don't generally talk about. It's starting to come out more and more. But these are the hidden grieving points for many, many of my clients. Is the first time you have to check the single box.
Right.
The first time you have to share your like you don't have your child. So you're out in the world. How do you describe your, you know, I'm a single mom versus I'm a single dad. And when it was, you know, the 2 of you were parents together. So many identity shifts. I'm sure both of you can relate.
And there's so much concern around the judgment and the shame. And, you know, I remember going to my children's school for the first time. And, you know, you kind of have to tell the teachers and the, you know, administration, like, hey, this is going on in case there's something going on with my kids. I just want to tell you. Like, I cried. I mean, you're just, because you feel like, how are they going to look at you? What are they going to think about you? Or, and it's the shift amongst your friend groups, you know, and the impact.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, there's an earthquake that goes on when someone is splitting up in your circle of friends. I mean, it changes so many dynamics. You know, even telling your parents, like there's shame or, you know, concern around that. My dad didn't talk to me for 3 days. We were on a boat in a remote. It was very uncomfortable.
Oh, Heather, very uncomfortable. I think across the board, that's what I have. You know, I did an informal poll of a lot of my male friends right before I came on and asked, you know, what was the biggest shift for you? And almost every single one of them said the shame and embarrassment or the piece of failure that they felt in getting a divorce. And I think across gender, it's not gender specific, as you just talked about. But I wanted to get the male experience more like a real sense of that, because I have mine and I'm a female, so it's very different, or it can be very different. But across the board, embarrassment, shame, and a sense of failure is really what is part of the shift as well.
You know, it's interesting. My significant other, one of the things that he was very surprised about after his own divorce was when he went to go talk to people, how people really were like, oh, okay. Like they weren't, none of that, what the perception that we have as the person going through it versus what he received from his friend group and his family even was, they weren't shaming him. No one actually did that. I mean, they just, it was sort of, and I don't know if it's maybe we're becoming more socially accepting of divorce. It happens, it's becoming more common. We're talking about it more in environments like this. So there isn't as much, while we internally think there is going to be this fallout, there really isn't that, it doesn't exist as much. I think that it does exist in religious places and some other you know, social constructs.
But I imagine it exists internally always.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Like, so there's always this set of, well, internal value, internal, like, moral compass, and an internal, like, idea of, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to have this lifestyle. I'm supposed to have this many kids. And, you know, okay, I'm speaking more to maybe a younger marriage than somebody who's been together for 30 years, in the sense that you've got this idea that I'm going to get married, I'm going to have my children by this time. You know, you create this world, and that world doesn't happen, or half of it happens and it doesn't fully happen. And it's like, all of a sudden you're like, what? So you're thrown into this identity shift, or thrown into this unknown. And so you're dealing with that internally, and then you're ashamed because what you're ashamed of, you think everybody else is looking. So how how do you get unstuck in this, like this thought process, you know? I mean, I know there's not one stop shop for everything, but like, what is some of the things and how are some of the ways that what we can think and do and shift that?
Great question. And I do want to address that there are some circles, yes, faith can be one of them. Faith circles can have, can have that shift. And I know I felt that especially. There's also, just a general shift with, it's embarrassing to say I'm divorced for most people. And even though, and there are many people think divorce is contagious.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a known thing. So it goes both ways. I remember my first couples workshop after I was divorced. I teach couples workshops. My first one, I very vulnerably got up and said, you might be wondering, how can a divorced marriage and family therapist help you with your marriage? And I went on to share a few things, but I did have a few couples in that when they worked with me, they said, well, after the workshop, I'd really like to work with someone who stayed married. And I remember feeling the sting of that, but also knowing that they were coming from a place of fear of their own marriage. So
Right.
there is a like, divorce is contagious. If you're divorced, so how can you possibly help me? And that's some of the things that I've experienced. So how do we do that? Big question. We start from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And we begin. The first thing I think that's important is to acknowledge the identity shifts that you have. Checking the single box. Whether you're married, filing separately, or unmarried. There's all these. Just even in filling out paperwork, acknowledging that your identity is going through a shift and a change, and that number one, you're going to be okay. It's a process. It's a muscle building process. But I think first you have to process the hurt. You get to, maybe not have to, you get to process your hurt.
Right.
And by processing that and acknowledging it, even if you were the one that wanted the divorce, even if you were the one that was leaning out first, processing it, with a close other, a coach, a therapist, doesn't have to be therapy, although I'm kind of biased. I think coaches and therapists, we can have an unemotional, come alongside you, hold your hand through it. So that's one of the biggest things, is to acknowledge the grief. This is not where I thought I would be. This is not what I wanted. Even if I want the marriage ended, I didn't know that I would be in this place at this time, at this age, in this year. Does that make sense? So processing the hurt.
No, I think that's really important. In fact, we often, and I know this was for me, it's like you push it away, because the more that you think about it, the more that you put energy to it. I felt like I was like admitting it, or I was, do you know what I mean? I was like, oh, it is a problem, or, and I wanted to be like, I'm okay. I don't know. And it was, there's one of those things that you fake it till you make it, but actually it was really detrimental, because you can say that about a couple of things, like, winging technology or winging something else. Okay, that's fine, because there's no emotional attachment. But when you're talking about growth and you're talking about getting unstuck, then it's really important that you have to process that and really sit with it and understand that. And it's okay to feel, just feel bad that you have to tick the single box.
Well, shame, exactly, Layla. Shame wants us to hide. That's the function of shame, is to hide and point the finger at others. And by bringing our own shame to light, guilt or shame, whatever that is, shame is I'm the mistake, guilt is I made a mistake. And even transitioning clients to that is a big shift as well, is that sure, every marriage takes two to make it work, and every marriage takes two to end up to contribute to the demise of the marriage, whether it's a passive participation or an active participation in the demise. So I agree with you. It's we have to acknowledge our pain, because it's like holding a beach ball underwater. Right. You hold a beach ball underwater for a long period of time, your muscles begin to shake, and it's like, I'm going to hide it. But that beach ball wants to push itself up. And what happens if you hold it long enough? Your muscles get tired and you let it go, and it explodes. Water goes everywhere. So I'm about the pressure cooker atmosphere, which is let a little pressure off. Reach for a friend, co-burden that. Someone who's not going to tell you, someone who's going to tell you the truth, but's going to love you through it. Right. Process that pain with a close other, someone who's safe. Biggest thing is talking about it, acknowledging it, because otherwise, whatever we resist, it will persist. Not my saying.
That actually reminds me of something you said earlier, was the journaling that you did yourself. So, there are some cases that people find it really hard to open up to other people. And what do you think, how that role of journaling? I mean, we are strong believers, Heather and I, journaling. We even have it in our community. We're always prompting people ideas of what to write about if they're stuck on something. Just because it really, even if you're writing for me, even if I'm writing something like, okay, what's my favorite color? Out of that comes a plethora of emotions. Like, what am I feeling? What is that color I'm feeling right now? Why am I picking that at this moment or whatever? And it just floodgates open, and it's therapeutic when I write.
Well,
So
there's something about the energy, the vibrational energy of anxiousness, of sadness, of fear that stays inside of us. And without a release of that, it stays vibrational inside of us, and then our thoughts begin to swirl. So there's something to be said about getting it out on paper or verbalizing it with another person, getting it out of your space. And I call that co-burdening. Co-burdening is what we're wired for. Physiologically, we are wired to co-burden our distress. And so without that process, whether it be journaling or with someone else, it really, it causes health issues. I mean, there's multiple repercussions of not getting that space out. And I've had clients come to me years post-divorce that didn't process, and they're having health issues. They're, physiological health issues. They're having emotional issues. They're having trouble, maintaining a relationship. And once we process some of that pain, it opens up the door for, I'm okay. I've been okay, and I'm gonna be okay. And it just really helps. So there's something about that. I hate journaling, to be honest. I recommend it, and I'm the worst. I don't like journaling. So I had to force myself to sit down, but I'm really glad I did.
that's because you're very good at articulating things, obviously. And you can speak to people, which you're right. And I'm actually a talker myself. So it's not that, but there is something about, I feel freer sometimes. I think maybe because I'm still a little bit hesitant to say everything freely about a particular subject. I'm not saying for everything, but so sometimes that journaling just helps me get there. And, it helps me maybe when the time is right, or I do find somebody that I can talk to about it, then I open up freer, because I've written it down.
Absolutely. Heather, I don't know I know you encourage clients to journal. Did you have any experience yourself with that, or do you find it helpful?
I am a talker, and I think what I ended up doing, which was a bit of maybe verbal journaling, is during my divorce and a little bit after, I spent a lot of time in a small town where I wasn't really known, but I was very comfortable there. I had a cabin, and I went there alone a lot. And I was not one to really spend time on my own, as I was and so I was spending a lot of time thinking and trying on different identities, because, I would go out to, whatever the local music was, and sit there, and I was by myself. I went and did a lot of, there was, like, on Tuesday afternoons, one of the wineries had coloring. And so I would go sit and color, and occasionally, probably 8 times out of 10, I would end up chatting with people. And it was always like, oh, so what brought you to this small town? And, and you end up kind of sharing your history. And it was funny because I was trying on this new story. I mean, it wasn't, my now ex-husband and I going up there together with our kids. It was, I was there now as a single person, and I would bring my kids up occasionally so people knew who they were. But a lot of times I was there alone when I didn't have my kids, and was working through things. And so I was kind of trying on different stories. I mean, they were all true, but they were, how it was I was engaging and in a community versus, and it wasn't in my community, my mainstay community with my children, because, I would have to come back down and when my days with my children, have those conversations. And those were much harder. But I gained a lot of confidence and comfort in a really wonderful group of people that I've met and become very good friends with now, that, made me feel better. They made me feel okay. They made me feel whole again, because there is a loss, and sort of, you're okay as a single parent and doing this and making these choices that you're making for you. So
Mm,
that was sort of, I think, how I worked on that identity shift.
Right.
And then when I was down here, when I was back, in my main house, I would talk to people. I'm like, well, part-time, I live in this other town, and part-time I'm here. And I'm just kind of working myself out of what I'm going to be doing next in life. And that also gave me permission to evolve with my community, with my kids. And they were like, oh, I totally get that. And so I think that when I spent a lot of time thinking about my identity shift into that world, that's, kind of how I facilitated that through, and after,
mhm.
through, before, during, and after my divorce, really.
Well, I think we're in a group of external processors, maybe I would assume extroverts. And what I heard, Heather, from you is something that's very hard for some people, which is to go off on your own and connect with yourself.
It was a
And that
huge
can be,
challenge for me. I'll
and
be
then there's
honest.
the opposite. I have to tell you that was one of the biggest and hardest things for me, was being alone. My youngest child went off to college the year that my ex-husband and I separated. And so I really rarely had time alone, by choice. I mean, I had 3 kids, and I'm not complaining about it. But when the divorce happened, that was a huge shift. Here I was living on my own. My kids were transitioning, going through their own grief process. So they weren't necessarily happy with both of us for a
No.
period of time. And my friends, after 27 years, my friends were all married. I had 0 single friends that I
Wow.
was close to. So what you speak of, Heather, is something really courageous for those of us that maybe have a tendency to grab for others, is to go and connect with self. For those that do more of that, like, I'm just going to be alone, is challenging them to step out of their comfort zone and be courageous and connect with others.
Right.
Because I do believe that both are important. So you speak to something really courageous.
Yeah, and I think that partly I was a full-time stay-at-home mom when I got divorced. So I went from 100% to then 50%. And I needed to
Big
rebuild.
shift.
Yeah, big shift. I had to go back, rebuild my career again, and I had to do something different. I couldn't go back to the world I did before because I couldn't relocate my children. And so I knew that I needed to challenge myself to spend some time alone and really look at myself. But I also knew my energy and desire to be with people would get me out of the house again, right? Because I would be sitting in my cabin alone, and by about 4 PM, I'm like, oh, I really need people. Like, otherwise I stay on the couch all day and not do anything. Because to your point, I'm an extrovert. I am energized by being around other people, even if it's not even just being in their space.
But it must have been also really helpful that those people that you were interacting with at 4 o'clock when you decided to weren't the ones that were in your constant ecosystem at home with your kids. And exactly.
Absolutely.
Like, it's so much easier sometimes to be out of the ones that you think are judging you, that you think you have to get out of that mindset. And so sometimes you have to give yourself space from them, and not in a mean way.
Wine bar down the street where I was going to run into people I knew. I was only running into people I didn't know.
Right. It's easier. It's so much, I definitely can relate to that, but it is courageous to be on your own. I think that's one of the hardest things to be okay with. And even though you have children, it doesn't, and you're right, you never feel really alone with kids, but you do feel alone because it's what you're going through internally. And,
there's a schedule shift. There's a commitment shift that happens when you go through divorce. And again, like, my identity was, stay-at-home mom, doing all the running around, cooking all the meals, running all the errands, doing, everything there. And then suddenly,
50% of that time has been taken from you.
Right.
Like,
or 50% of that, I don't want to say liability, but 50% of that workload, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
suddenly, you can do that. I was like, I had so much free time on my hands that also you think about, what am I going to be doing with myself? Like, and, while I was getting divorced, which is, for a lot of people, a full-time job. And it can be very overwhelming in a procedural standpoint, and doing that work on yourself. So that's, I think, where I ended up supporting my identity evolution was through that, but it's hard. And I see a lot of people do get stuck in the identity of I'm going through a divorce, and they cling on to that because you can live in that space while you're going through the process. And there's a huge amount of forgiveness that people have towards you. Or on the flip side of that, Kimberly, to your point earlier, where they think it's contagious, or it can also be irritating. People will end up losing, or friends will scatter because they don't want to keep hearing about the divorce. So, and if your entire identity and world is mired in that, there's not a lot of productive forward momentum happening. And so how would you talk to people who are, you do get stuck. I think, there is a paralysis that happens, when you're in this,
Well, again, I think, I'm sorry, Heather.
No,
sorry. I think again, first of all, we have to acknowledge for ourselves. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't. I feel like we need to identify identity, like define identity. As I was talking to a couple of my friends before this webinar, they were like, what do you mean by identity? I didn't, it's just part of my world and what I do with clients. So right. I wanted to read a definition of identity just so everybody's on the same page of what we're talking about. So, and I know you both know this, but it's the way we think about ourselves and the way we think we're viewed in the world and characteristics that define us. And many, many people go through an identity crisis when there's a big developmental transition, whether it be death, whether it be divorce, whether it be getting married, whether it be having children. And we all have that certain image of ourselves. And identity helps us make decisions in our world and know how to behave. So as a mom, that's part of my identity as a mom. That has shifted over the years. My kids are all grown. They're all in their own careers. They're in their own relationships. They live out of town. My identity as a mom has shifted to more of a walk alongside versus guide.
Right.
That makes sense. So back to your question, Heather, is how do we heal from that? Is processing the hurt. Some cannot move beyond the hurt, and it keeps them stuck both in the legal process. It keeps them stuck in their own lives. There's also a concept of unfairness. I hear a lot about that in my work with clients is, it's unfair. Let's say one of the spouses that wasn't as involved with the children because of career or whatever reason, all of a sudden in divorce wants a relationship. And that's very hard for the other partner who maybe have been longing for that or criticizing to get that, or, trying, all of a sudden there's a shift like, oh, now all of a sudden you're involved in the kids' lives. Well, children benefit from a relationship with two healthy parents. I'm not talking about abusive, but healthy parents. So to me, it's about getting information. Heather and I met in a different divorce, networking group. And one of the things that's really important that I wish I had known is, connect with professionals like yourself.
Right.
There's a lot of free resources out there, both of you and me, is connect with us. We can spend 15 minutes on the phone and I can identify, can I help you? Are we a good fit? Or do I need to refer you to these other resources? Right. Get information, because I think I heard this, and forgive me if it was one of you, the person with the most information and the least emotional response during the legal process has the best advantage.
Yeah.
Best outcome.
100%.
Best outcome. Yeah, maybe I said that wrong. Maybe it was you, Heather, who shared that. And that really stuck with me.
Yep, it's absolutely true, which is why we spend a lot of time focusing our energy on helping people to get educated and to get to those resources as soon as they can.
Exactly. And connecting with professionals that can shed that light on them. Like, this is a very, I would say that nothing prepares you for divorce ever, even though even like you said earlier, even if you want the divorce, nothing prepares you for the outcome and the rollout afterwards or during, and with your kids, especially the anger they might have towards you, the feelings that they have.
Yes.
You're navigating your own and you're navigating your children's if you've got children. So that's, even harder. I think you need to reach out, and that's, again, it's hard for an introvert to maybe do something like that, but it's so important that, these are professionals. They're very used to it. There's no judgment. There's no thing. It's very, Heather and I hold a support hour, and it's like, you just come in. You don't have to have an agenda. You can just say whatever. You can even talk about not your divorce if you don't want to, but
That's really great.
there if there's something that might correlate back to that, or we can kind of see the signs. And I know I have a lot of clients who get really stuck with that same story you just talked about he never was present in their lives, and now all of a sudden he wants to have 50%, or he has this, and it's an ulterior motive. And I said, well, it's not going to help you by already putting him into in a position where he's trying to get something else out of it other than being with your kids, because your kids deserve it. Their kids deserve the other parent, and it might not be the same as you, and you might not know how to do, and you might not know how to feed them right, and you might not know how to clothe them right, or clean, wash their clothes. But at the end of the day, they're going to be loved, and they're going to be cared for, and they have a connection with them.
They can learn. We all can learn. There's differences. And I know even socially, it reminded me, Layla, even socially is like, there's usually one partner that's more of the social director in the relationship. I was that. And I know that, I don't want to speak for him, but he shared with me that, getting out there and creating relationships, and pursuing those friendships, it was harder after divorce because he had to do some work. I know my partner now has told me that when he went through his divorce, after the custody was all settled, is that being a baseball coach with his boys was really important to him. And then when they aged out, it was the one regular piece of contact he had with them other than his time when he had them, and he had less time than their mom did. So for him, that was a huge identity shift. He was no longer their coach. He had to be creative and find other ways to draw them in and connect with them. And now that they were aged out, there's a whole bunch of factors. I feel like I don't know if this is a good segue, but I feel like the 4 places people get stuck in my practice, and this isn't all encompassing, but the 4 big ways is, getting stuck in their hurt and not being able to move through that. Like I said, that concept of unfairness, their relationship with their children, getting stuck in your child's supposed to understand, pushing them too far too soon, introducing them to people before I made that mistake before it was time. The fear of being alone, and the opposite of that, the fear of never finding someone, like I'm always, or maybe the fear of marriage, the fear of the institution of marriage. Like, I don't ever want to be in a relationship because this one was so bad.
Right.
So, and then the shame. So those are the things that I come across that are the hardest, that keep people stuck if they go unprocessed. I don't know about you two, as you're coaching.
No, I think that you're 100% right. All of them. I think anger stands out the most during a divorce, in the sense that you'll find when 2 people are stuck in something, it's usually somebody's angry because they're relenting or releasing funds or money or finance, and their financial situation changes. Or, to the point earlier, is that, they think they're a better parent and they know more, and they're angry, or they've been wronged because they've been cheated on, and they can't shift out of that to see what is the best, how can they get the best outcome? Forget about what happened, how it happened. Not easy, and I'm not saying it is, but it's like, let's just shift gears to see, okay, all right, it has happened. Let's try to accept that, and then let's move over here, and let's look at how we can get to where we want to get to, so that you can restart your life. Even if you've been wronged, it doesn't mean that it has to happen again, and it doesn't mean that you have to be stuck in that. So that's a really tough mind shift. The anger is a really big one. And
anger is an umbrella for sadness and fear.
Right.
99% of the time. So whenever there's anger, I know that underneath that is fear of something, like you talked about the payor. Fear of, socioeconomically, most people's lives change. That's another identity shift.
Right.
I'm not talking about the high earners and the, upper top 1%, but for most people, their socioeconomic status changes.
Right.
And they're living, remember, the pool of funds is now supporting 2 families, possibly, or not at all. I know there's lots of, so it is important to process that anger, to feel it, to acknowledge it, to have it, but then understand what's driving it, which is usually some sort of sadness, grief, or fear.
So how do you, and I mean, I imagine there's not one formula set for this, but how do you, after processing it, try to shift that mindset into getting out of it? Because it's one thing like, okay, I'm processing it. I know I'm angry. I understand it. Okay, I know where it's coming from. But then how do you get out of that? Like, how do
Get
you,
out of the,
that being in that, like, even if you're processing
being in
it,
the hurt.
yeah, being in the hurt, being in the fear is, I mean, I think it stays with you for a while, because even if you're not angry anymore, if you're not, upset about certain things, there's always that fear about, like, I was speaking to someone just today, actually this morning, and he said, I'm really fearful about how my kids are going to be with their relationships growing up. It's like all of a sudden you have another fear. It's like, okay, it's now your fear is gone. Like, you've got the fear of your children and how that's going to impact their lives, their relationships. And I'm like, oh, how, I mean,
Well, we talk about fear and how it brings us way out into the future. So fear takes us way out into the future, and we want to bring it back to present day of what's happening here and now. And that's a muscle building exercise as well. So when I'm working with clients we give a lot of space for the fear. We make lists of what those fears are. I validate that they're real and understandable, acknowledge them, and then we work on each time the fear drags you right out. There's different techniques. I have lots of techniques that I help with clients, is how to bring the fear right. I'm okay right now.
right.
My relationship with my kids is good right now, or it's not good. And there are things that I can do in my control. I can send them a note once a week, even if they don't reply. There's lots of ways to process that fear. And here's the thing, fear's going to keep coming in, surprisingly, coming in, almost any developmental stage we go through, just coming in like, what's new, what's next? What you do with that fear is really important. We talked about co-burdening. We talked about whether it's through a journal, it's through a person, co-burdening. There's a remote control exercise I have clients do where, if you were watching something on TV and you didn't want to see it, what would you do? You change the channel. We talk to the fear. We acknowledge that it's an object inside of us, and what does it look like? What's its shape? I use what's called a light stream technique. And a light stream technique basically has them imagine what is the shape, you can find this on the internet anywhere. What is the shape of that fear? What does it look like? Does it have an object? Does it have a sound? Does it have a smell? And we imagine this light stream coming in, this healing light, and they get to choose what color that is. That's going to, like, almost like a laser beam, resonate or vibrate and resonate around the object, and it magically dissipates as we're going through this exercise. So that I help clients fill their tool belt so that when they're at a 1 or 2 on a scale of 10, they have one or two tools to pull out. Breathing, some of the things you both probably use in your own coaching. Then I also, like, if we're at a 7, 8, 9, we need more than one tool. We need a friend. We need, the call a friend. We need 2 or 3 different things out of our tool belt to help us just bring it down a notch. And so that's what we walk through. But first we have to walk around in the pain. What is it? Where does it come from? Our backgrounds, our childhood backgrounds inform us how we are processing pain, the different techniques we used or didn't get.
I used to use, mine was called, I named her Bertha.
I love it.
Which, sorry if there's any Berthas out there, but that was my, this is this ugly little person that's sitting right here and is either screaming at me or talking to me. And I'm like, Bertha, it's not time for that right now.
Right.
I mean, yeah, and especially with public speaking and things like that, I'm like, she's not welcome on the stage, but
I love that. I like that.
And it's, and I think
I put mine in the trunk when I'm driving. Okay, you're always sitting next to me on the passenger seat, and I don't have time for you right now. You're in the trunk today.
Move it on.
I know you're banging back there. I can hear you. You're knocking on the door.
Yes. I mean, and it's so, it's so interesting too, because I think when it comes to identity and concern, it's a lot of our self-talk about, what we think about ourselves and what we think people should perceive us as versus reality. And, I bring this up in a couple of different, discussions that Lila and I have had. And it's, if people could hear how I talk to myself inside of it, they would want to punch that person out. I mean, they would be like, what is wrong? Like, you don't talk to our friend like that. You don't, I would never talk to anyone like my internal voice talks to myself, ever.
We are our hardest critic, Heather. That's a really good point.
And I think trying to get yourself out of that, that's, you know, for me, given me a lot more space to operate in,
Mm-hmm.
and forgiveness of myself, and, you know, where I judge myself falling short. Like I am, yeah, I'm definitely my own worst critic. Or
One
hardest.
of the articles, you know, this reminds me, Heather, as you're talking about this, one of the articles I read a while back, it said, let me see if I have the quote here. It said, learn to accept that the purpose of life was not generated by the partnership, but that the partnership played a role in your life's purpose at one time. It's
Can you?
just it's a bit of a shift there, right? The
Yes.
partnership you form during marriage is not your only identity, but for many of us, it becomes that. Like I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm this, I'm exact. But it doesn't define you. You are a separate person, and while that can feel really scary, like who am I without marriage and kids? There's freedom to grow from that, and it's not for the put your seatbelt on. It's a
Yeah,
wild
yes,
ride,
it
for
is.
sure.
Right.
Yeah, I call it the scariest roller coaster in the amusement park. And
It is, which is why we need each other. We are physiologically wired to co-burden and to connect with people, even if, excuse me, even if we're an introvert. So some
yeah,
of the work that's really has been really helpful is Brene Brown. Are
yeah,
you both
I love
familiar
her.
with?
Yep.
She's great.
Okay.
And in fact,
Okay.
I think that is something that probably why Heather and I have also really are so passionate about what we're doing, is because community is everything. And creating this community of people who get it, who don't judge, who understand, especially, you know, because
Mm-hmm.
they're going through it themselves, or they've gone through it themselves, or they're professionals. So it's like merging the community of people of professionals that understand and can relate and help and
Mm-hmm.
educate, and then those who are going through it or have gone through it, who are constantly kind of are going through it, because it's a process, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, is so important. I mean, it's so important. The minute that you talk to somebody like that, you're just like, oh, yeah, you get me. Like, or you just said something and it makes it not me, it doesn't make me feel crazy. It doesn't make me, because part of it
It
is that
validates your experience. Yes.
I also had an alter ego named Nina, which is funny because I named my dog Nina. Is it crazy? I think, I don't know, but it was more like the crazy person, you know, that crazy person. It was spearheaded by the whole Ally McBeal show, which I loved so much. And I love that idea of like, kind of almost like, okay, here's music playing in your head, and those case scenarios. It's like, that was my Nina, like, you know, just either singing or going crazy or talking like crazy talk. And it was okay. I try to detach myself from it, and that was my way of doing it. Like you guys
Mm-hmm.
had your own. It's like, it helps. It kind of helps.
Well, the key in that, Layla, is that you acknowledge, again, and we talked about this earlier, you acknowledged what was there for
Yeah.
you. And, you know, this Brene Brown quote, she says, and I'll get this wrong, but she says, you know, if we deny our story and deny our pain, it owns us. It has it has the upper hand. But
Right.
when we acknowledge it, first of all, we get to write our own ending,
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging the pain and owning it actually sets us free. And I know that sounds crazy, but it really, really does. And so I don't want us to all three of us to paint this picture that it's a rosy process. You guys know, you wrestle with so much. There were many nights I was sitting on the rug of my living room, just crying, like, how did I get here? And
Right.
it was more of a mutual split for us. How did I get here? How did I get to this point? Oh my goodness, my life is so different now, emotionally. If I didn't allow myself those moments and acknowledge, I can imagine what a bigger mess I would have been
Yeah.
emotionally for that.
Yep.
So
It's absolutely true. And it's spending time in those thoughts and in that space, and, having that energy kind of pour through your body and hopefully escape and not get mired down is how you end up moving.
yeah, you get to take responsibility for your life and what's happened, acknowledging your own part. I work with clients. I tell them, all right, what did your ex-spouse complain about? Let's look at it as we're just looking at a picture on a wall. We're not acknowledging that it's ours. We're not taking responsibility, but let's look at the things they complained about. Is it something you could work on?
Right.
Let's do that so that you have connection with yourself, and if you're interested in a relationship further down the line, you're not going to make the same mistakes,
Right.
because we tend to do that. We tend to fall right back into those patterns. And I
100%.
think it's 100%. I think it's really, really helpful to, just you get to make meaning out of what happened in a way that allows you to move forward, and staying stuck in the pain of that, allowing the pain to own you no, nobody owns me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's no one.
Nobody gets to own me.
Mm-mm. No, which is huge. So
I definitely know
Yeah.
that therapy, I don't think I could have done it without it, to be honest with you.
Mm.
Me
Too. And I'm a therapist.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was my sacred space. It was my place that, I mean, sometimes I never even spoke. I just cried the whole time. And I remember it was like, or hit a pillow or whatever I had to do. And it was just a place that I know I needed to go to get like my emotions out and not be stuck with them. And, and she gave me tools. And I remember that honestly, if I didn't go through therapy, I don't know where I would have been. And it was like, and it literally was right after, a week after my divorce, or a week after we separated. It's like, I've got to go see someone. It was like, and I had never had seen a therapist before. So for me, it was a huge novelty opening up, and I didn't know what to expect. And, sometimes I even felt ashamed crying the whole time. I was like, should I be doing this? And then, but as you do, you're like, actually, this is really feeling good. The feel good afterwards outweighed all that self-talk that I was talking through myself at, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. This person doesn't know me. It's all these things. And you're like, no, this is what they do. And she allowed me to do that. That was, I don't know, so important.
So important. We're not meant to do this. We're not meant to do life alone. And we're not meant to do this alone. And I tell clients, go seek a coach or well, obviously if they're with me, they're seeing a therapist, but I encourage my personal life, go seek a coach or a therapist. It's not going to hurt you. No. If you go to someone good and you get a referral. I will say this, there are support groups. It sounds like you both have this support hour. I tell people, go to one of those meetings, whether it's divorce care, whether it's a support group, and gravitate to the healthiest person in the room.
Right.
Don't gravitate to the person who just wants to stay stuck and wants to just, like, it's a processing place, and there gets to be freedom in processing, but find that person who's further down the line in their emotional health and gravitate towards them. Ask them, what have you done? What did you do? How long have you been in this group? Because if you go to the person who's, like, let's say when I was first divorcing brand new, I don't know that I can help clients, but I don't know personally if I was much help, because I was in it.
Right.
I would turn away coffee dates. Oh, I'm sorry, Heather, go ahead.
No, I said that's such good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would turn away coffee dates with other people who were just starting to go through divorce in my life, or had been, because I don't celebrate divorce. I don't advocate for it. I know it's a reality of life, but I definitely didn't want to bond with someone over divorce.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Totally makes
sense.
I
wanted to bond in the healing. What are you doing? How are you getting there? What do I need to do?
I get you. I feel you. Let's, and that is the most important thing. It's like, let's not rant all the time and be stuck in it. And we also don't know how much we're talking about it when we're in it. And, it's kind of nice when somebody has gone through, you have a little bit more of that like runway that you can say, hey, you're talking about it again, it's not going to help us, like that's not going to help you, because I don't know, as opposed to coming from one of your good friends who hasn't gone through it, because then you're like, well, you don't get it. You're talking about, there's some kind of, there's that exchange. Well, you don't get what I'm feeling. We use that a lot when we're talking to our friends if they haven't gone through what we've gone through. Or I hear it, my clients, like my friends don't understand what I'm feeling. It's like, well, they don't actually. And that's why it's really hard for them. They can only empathize in a certain way. But whereas when you're talking to someone who has, they have the power to be like, all right, let's not even talk about this anymore. And you can take it to heart.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. I think, I just welcomed one of our guests that came on. Exactly. There's so much involved. And again, going back to the identity pieces, we want to acknowledge that there are shifts. And those shifts aren't necessarily permanent. Sometimes they're transitional identity shifts. Right. Yep. And we can thrive. We will be okay. I have to say unequivocally, we will be okay. You are stronger than you think. Look at
Right.
all three of us,
Totally.
in the trenches, having gone through emotionally. Like, I'm super confident today. You would have talked to me 6 years ago. I don't think I could have done a webinar like this. I wouldn't have known what to say. I would have been stuck in my shame and embarrassment.
So true. It's so true. I'm the same here. In fact, I'm even speaking out to it and even thinking that people would want to hear it, but not like in a bad way, the story, but how it shifted and it really changed the course of my life. I mean, divorce changed the course of my life. It attracted people that I never would have attracted before, which is so amazing. Friends, people, colleagues. I mean, all these things. I'm like, this is great. I'm loving it. Like, I pinch myself. I'm like, this is amazing, actually. And I love the mission. I love that I actually genuinely want to be a place and create a space to help people through the process themselves so they're not stuck. And a lot of people ask me, well, why would you want to be around, or why do you want to talk to people about divorce? Isn't it something so painful for you? I'm like, no, actually, because that pain that I felt has shifted my life in a new gear. And I want to be able to help people see beyond what they're going through, and be able to know that, like you said, you're going to be okay. And things are going to be fine, and really hold on to that. So
we all will be okay. Go ahead, Heather.
We absolutely all will be okay. Thank goodness. We're hitting your cutoff time. Be very respectful of.
Yeah.
I'm so appreciative of the time you spent. This is really such an important part of the healing process and the evolution and that happens through a divorce, and there can be some really positive things that come out of it, and you have to shed some negative things, and there's some bumps in the road. I mean, this isn't, a single track, hike up a hill. This is going to have some ups and downs and bumps, and try on some new identity part and go, oh, that doesn't feel good. Shed that,
it does shift.
Yeah.
I would say I'd love to leave you with just some real quick tips that I have found to be the most helpful with clients, and even personally, is remembering that divorce is the end of a relationship. It's not the end of you, and that you get to use this time to, I hate the word reinvent yourself, because we are who we are, but you get to reinvent parts of yourself. Right. And invest in yourself. That's the biggest thing I can say, whether that's, finding a new hobby, processing the pain, working with a coach. Invest in yourself. It's worth it. Put the kids as a priority in your interactions.
Yes.
Get information. Don't be hesitant to reach out and ask questions of professionals. Some are more than happy to talk to you and give you, give you tips and tricks. Don't date until you've emotionally processed the divorce.
I was
big
going
one.
to ask that in our interview. I was going to ask. I'm like, am I opening up Pandora's box?
Well, that's a whole nother webinar, right? I hired a coach after I realized I made a mistake. I hired a coach, and the biggest thing is, like I said, remind yourself that you're going to be okay. If you can't do that, find someone who can tell you that you're going to be okay, and we are stronger than we think. And no matter what pain you are processing in the midst of your divorce, whether some clients are really relieved, process the relief and what that means. They feel guilty for being relieved. Let's walk through that together. And those are my big tips. And but definitely connect with other people, professionals and groups and things like that to help you process. We're not meant to do this alone.
I agree. That's great. I love that. Everything that you said.
Thank you for having me, ladies. You're both wonderful. I can't wait to see as Split FYI moves forward, and all the wonderful people you're going to help and support. And I love that. And maybe I'll show up at one of your support hours. I'd love to hear more about that.
Love that. Before we go, can you let, we're going to put your details actually in the notes, but could you let everyone know what's the best way to book you, to connect with you, either on social media or email or website, whatever you want to provide?
Well, my website is the best one. It's KimberlySandstrom.com. I am on social media, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me there. I've got both Kimberly Therapy and the Classy Girl's Guide to Divorce. And so I'm the classy girl. I also help men as well. I've had, lots of men in my practice as they're navigating divorce or contemplating that. Even if you're contemplating divorce, you can reach out to me, because we can poke holes in that. We can look and see, is there another way, to stay in the relationship? And if not, let's help you transition well, so that you don't feel like you're dragged behind a truck in the gravel at the end of the process.
Right.
It doesn't have to feel that way. Doesn't have to feel that way. So KimberlySandstrom.com is the best way to reach me. And there's a form you can fill out for email and contact me, and we can go from there.
Amazing.
Thank
you
you
so much for your time. Thank you.
Love working with both of you.
Oh, we love it too. Working with you.
Great. We'll see you soon. And anybody else, you're welcome to email me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.